Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture to show the relevance of theology to everyday life. I'm Kasey Olander, and I'm the web content specialist here at the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary, and I appreciate you being with us today. Today, our topic is fascinating because it's about horror films, and we're going to obviously talk about them from a Christian perspective, and so we actually have three guests in the studio with us today. So starting on my left, we have Dr. Brian Chan, Assistant Professor of Media Arts and Worship. Brian, thanks for being back with us.
Thanks for having me. This will be such a great conversation.
Should be fun. And then on my right, we have Rebecca Carrell, Director of Apprenticeships and Adjunct Professor for the Media Arts and Worship Department. Rebecca, thanks for being here.
Always glad to be here.
And then to her right, we also have Dr. Aaron Switzer, Associate Director of Ministry Formation. So, Aaron, thanks for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I am interested in this conversation in, frankly, more of an academic sense. If you're joining us, you're a little bit skeptical, a little bit unsure about how scary movies can be seen from a Christian perspective. First, I admire that you're even listening to this at all. So thanks for that. And then second, honestly, I am right there with you. I'm no horror film aficionado. I'm definitely about to learn a lot during our conversation today. So buckle up and hang in there with us as we look at this interesting topic, like I said, from a Christian perspective, because we do discuss issues of God and culture. It's worth exploring why the world around us is interested in certain things. And so many people are facing the challenge of, how do I go from life to the Bible? How do I go from what I'm seeing in the world around me to, like, what does Scripture have to say about it? So the last couple times I've been to the movies, I have seen probably 90% of the things that I've seen are like horror trailers and posters and advertisements. So my first question is going to be, why is that? I'll start with you, Brian, but are horror films really that popular? Why is this even worth talking about?
Well, practically, yes. It's fairly well known in the industry that the quickest and fastest selling type of film is horror.
Really?
Yeah. So I was actually recently working with my co-writer. We were working on the script together, and I ended up becoming more of just a consultant for it. But that's what his executive producers asked for. He was saying, hey, there's a lot of things I've just kind of gone low in the production, but horror is still up there. And I think part of it is because of your teenagers. Your young adults, it's the thrill, the excitement. It sells quickly, sells easily. It's easy to write, and you can have horror type of films on various different levels of budget.
Okay.
So whether there's anything of a high budget or more of a low budget, people just sometimes like a good scare, and it's just kind of that popcorn thrill of it. But it is one of the highest, fastest selling genres. Okay,
interesting. You guys have anything to add to that about like what is appealing about horror films?
Yeah, one of the things I think about when it comes to this is, horror is, part of it is, what Brian was saying, there's just a thrill. And then, and it's kind of fun. It's fun to be taken to a different place in time where something's dangerous and something's scary, and you can watch and see what happens to the characters, but you're not in danger yourself.
Sure.
And so you can just enjoy that. You can enjoy the mystery of it. It can be strange, So there's a lot of things just that are enjoyable in that way. But I think something that might resonate more deeply with us is there are a lot of things in life that are just horrific. We all experience horror in our personal lives, or we witness it in what's going on with others. And so there's a great potential in a horror film to create a story that frames that so that we can have this shared experience. The person who's creating it, they can express themselves, and then the person who's viewing it, a lot of times that's actually helping them to maybe process some of the things that they're feeling, and that might be something you're consciously aware of, or it might be more just felt. So I think that's a part of the appeal.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, I never thought about it as like a form of catharsis, that people are kind of expressing and then also like sharing in this experience.
Yeah. So I don't even know if I should admit this. One of my earliest memories is staying up late with my parents I think I was 3, and they were letting me watch Friday Fright Night with Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and they would get donuts. And so really early on, it was a fun treat for me to get to stay up late and watch scary movies. So that has always been a genre that I've been drawn to. But as I've given this a lot of thought, and especially as I've gone further in my theological studies, I think there's an authenticity to the horror genre that some of the other genres might be missing, because we know deep within our DNA that things are not as they are supposed to be.
Yeah.
We know deep within our souls that monsters actually do exist, even though post-Enlightenment we say they don't. And we know that in life, you don't always get the guy, you don't always get the happy ending. In fact, more often than not, you don't. And so I think that there is something about the horror genre that rings true on a level that most people probably don't pause to contemplate.
That's fascinating. So that's another thing where, okay, as Christians, we value what's true, good, and beautiful. I guess we'll get into like if there's beauty in horror films. But what you're touching on is the fact that there's something true. Like that's what you guys are expressing, is that it's a way for filmmakers to express themselves, but also viewers are drawn to it because there's a sense of realism, even though there's, obviously some like fiction in them.
Right.
Fascinating. So what is it about horror films that, like, I guess, what do they say about our society? We've talked about kind of why people are drawn to them, like because of what's in the films themselves, but what is people's interest in the horrific say? So, like, sort of what you just mentioned, the fact that people are yearning for this, like, dose of realism, reality, that kind of thing, some emotional expression.
I think so. Yeah, I think you want stories to resonate. Regardless of genre, what I hope for from an artist is that they're going to, be honest, and whatever their worldview is, I want them to present that. So if in this case, a filmmaker, if they have a view of the world where they believe it's bleak and there's no redemption, that's the story I want them to tell. And then I want to be able to interact with that and do my own theological reflection.
Right. And
then I also want to have conversations in community about that. So, but I think that's, people really long for stories that they resonate and then that they are beautiful. There's a lot of different definitions of that too. But for me, beauty has a lot to do with whatever's fitting. So if I feel like something is kind of incongruent or not honest in that way, then it doesn't seem beautiful to me. So I think people are looking for something that, or even that tells their story. That's another one too. It's like I find myself in this film. It's given me language to help me understand what I'm going through. So I really do think that's a big draw.
Yeah, giving language being really helpful. And then also this sense of, okay, I'm not alone in feeling this way.
Yes.
Or even, like, Aaron, to what you said earlier, like having some sort of, like, experience of thrill. I don't know if you meant like physiologically or emotionally, maybe both, actually.
All the above,
yeah. But there's some sort of like embodied human experience that people are engaging in when they go watch a horror film.
Yeah, I think it's important to answer your question, what does it say about our society or reveal about us? Something that Rebecca said earlier is that there's something very unique about this genre. And the unique factor of this genre is horror is defined by fear. So horror films elicit fear. So, a comedy makes you laugh. Romantic movies, they give you the willy warms inside. And adventure makes you feel excitement. Well, horror has to make you feel fear. And that's distinguished from thrillers to suspense. Thrillers, suspense create anxiety. Anxiety is different from horror.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's a distinctive. So to define what we're talking about, it has to create fear. But within that, there's something very theological that Rebecca alludes to, and she used the word authenticity, and there's something very real about it. And I think that authenticity is both personal and theological. And I think Rebecca referred to the theological part of it as well, too. And the question really is then, well, what scares us? And that's what is revealing about society. What scares us personally? But there's also something very theologically grounded in what scares us. You think the very first, so within horror, there are subgenres, right? So subgenres of, you have your sci-fi horror, fantasy horror, post-apocalyptic horror, creature feature horrors, which is why I brought Godzilla on the table here. For those of you who can't see, I have Godzilla from Tokyo. And Godzilla, many of the Japanese-made ones are in the category of horror, not the American-made ones, but the Japanese-made ones on the category of horror, because it's exploring what we're afraid of annihilation, destruction. And you think of the first creature feature is in Genesis 3. The first monster appears with the serpent. Yeah. And with every horror film, you're thinking, okay, don't open that door. Don't open that door. No, don't listen to it. Don't listen to it. That monster's there. That monster's lying to you. And it's like that in Genesis 3. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. You know, it's a serpent. He's lying to you. And the outcome is something destructive. What you fear is annihilation, something destructive, chaos. It is a lack of flourishing of life, you know, and that's the outcome of Genesis 3, is something very, very destructive. And that's why you're on the edge of your seat, like, that's a monster, don't listen to it, you know. Yeah. So there's something very base in that, both personal and theological.
Yeah.
So I'm in no way a horror movie evangelist at all. Like, if someone has a conflict with a horror movie, then I think you need to listen to that, and I think that is your conscience telling you that's off limits for you. But I am a little bit of an apologist for the genre, and maybe it's just to defend my affinity for it. But I would, even to add to what you said, Brian, I would say that what we fear exposes our idols. And there is a useful feature in a horror movie that exposes the things that we hold tight to the most. I mean, and the Bible is so full of horror stories. I mean, if you think about it, you've got the flood, you've got Nephilim. Okay, let's talk about that. We've got these creatures, we don't know what they are, but they're getting women pregnant, and that's weird. And then they turn into giants, and that's strange. And you've got all of these stories, Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, think about how legitimately terrifying that would be. Yeah. So horror is all around us, and I think what Hollywood has done is it's just shown a light on it. Now, there is another question that should be explored. Should that be entertainment to us? Yeah. And I think that is probably where most people feel attention, is how much pleasure should we take from this? And then that's where I would say primarily the discussion probably should lie. Is the genre right? Is the genre wrong? I think it's useful, and I think that I don't think a binge of it is healthy, but I think an awareness of it and a theological assessment of it is good, because the culture is so enamored with it.
Yeah, that is really helpful to think about all of those different stories. When you mentioned horror in the Bible, I was thinking of, okay, bringing Samuel back when he's, you know, in this sort of ghostly form.
Yeah.
But that's
a ghost story. Yeah.
So that's fascinating to think that we're like, okay, we're okay with it in this context because it's God's word.
Sure.
But maybe it fits into this genre in a way that, okay, I hadn't thought about that before.
Well, if you think about what the flood really must have been like, you've got carcasses floating all over the place. I mean, you've got, this didn't happen in an instant. This happened over a period of days. And it would have taken, I mean, what did it take, 40 days for the flood to cover the earth? So we're talking about Noah and his family listening to screams for weeks. I mean, that's just utterly terrifying. Yeah. And so Hollywood actually did not invent it. You know, its evil has been present since darn near close to the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's not quite the cute little kid story that sometimes people kind of edit it down to be.
Not when we pause and think about, what did this sound like? What did this look like? What did this smell like? That would have been absolutely, utterly big T traumatic.
Yeah.
The last story of Judges. Yeah. That's a horror story. I mean, does not leave you, feeling very, very sick in the stomach. And you just don't know what to do with it. Right. And the worst kind of horrors are the horrors where it ends with not a resolution, no hope. And that's the last story of the book of Judges, right? The way it ends, you're like, it can't end this way. Right. But I think it addresses, though, the flip side to your question, Kasey, which is not only what does horror reveal about us, but what does horror show us? And it shows us a brokenness. It shows us a certain reality, a reality of the fall, and a reality of spirituality things we don't want to admit to. You know what I mean? We just want to deny. We just want to go about our lives, but these things are real, and that fear that is generated makes you acknowledge an awareness, to have an awareness that these things are real.
Yeah. Well, let's go there then, because a lot of people, sometimes the question is, well, okay, maybe I'll watch this scary movie, but I'm not going to watch that one about demons because that really freaks me out. Like, as a Christian, I do believe in demons. You know, like, it's clear in Scripture that our battle's not against flesh and blood. There's a spiritual reality to the world that we live in that a lot of times, praise the Lord, we can't see. So, like, what is it, like, how do we think about those kinds of movies? Is that like, well, that's over the line and that's too far? Does it open a door to the demonic? How would you respond to that?
That's what I've heard more than anything else, is if you watch those movies, you are somehow opening a door for demonic activity to enter into your life. I do not believe that's true. I have heard others with more theological training than myself affirm that they do not believe that is true. And so I think that there's some discernment involved, and if you have alarm bells going off in your spirit, I think that's probably the Lord telling you that's off limits for you. I have not had that experience, and I tend to gravitate toward the supernatural horror movies like The Exorcist, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Those are the ones that fascinate me. I'm not interested in Friday the 13th. I'm not interested in Saw. I'm not interested in what some people call like body horror. It's the supernatural element that captivates me the most because I think that is the closest to reality. And we do know of stories that mirror those accounts pretty closely. And so those are the ones for me. I like to see what Hollywood thinks of when they think of the demonic. Yeah. And then I like to think to myself, and I like to pray and read Scripture and think, okay, what does this look like? And if this is true, and I think it is, what does the general Christian population need to know about the spiritual war that is going on around us? And things that actually do open the door to that, which I would say are occultic practices, walking in unforgiveness, walking in bitterness, direct rebellion to the Lord. That's far habitual lying, habitual drinking, watching pornography. That's far more likely to open a door to the demonic than watching The Exorcist on a Friday night.
Yeah, that is really interesting too. You know, that we have to weigh all of these different things instead of the ones that are like, yeah, stereotypically like thought of in that way. But Aaron, do you have anything you would add to that?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad that you twice have brought up that part of the discernment of deciding what to watch is just being honest about what might be too much for you, you know, because some things can just be overwhelming.
Sure.
You know, there's no use if it's going to be traumatic, for example, and a film can be. It depends on, you know, the person who's watching it. Well, then that's really of no value. So you don't want that. So I'm glad that you've brought that up twice. I just wanted to say, yeah, I really agree with that. I think that's an important part of the reflection. And I agree too. It's like, you know, what is the character of the film, I think, has more to do with whether or not you could say it's demonic than the content itself. So if it's about demons, but it's showing you something that's true or it's an honest exploration, that would be different than something that's used intentionally to be manipulative or lying, right? Because that would actually be more in the character of the demonic itself.
That's good.
But in terms of like protecting yourself, everything you said, you know, the practices that you identified, I think that's more where the danger would lie. The only thing I would add to it is in the viewing experience itself, I don't think we should go into anything passively.
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes we come to something and, you know, we're kind of zoning out and we just want it to be entertainment and it's just kind of washing over us, but we're not thinking critically about what we're watching. So what kind of meaning do you make of it after the fact? And so, you know, I think there's the potential for some harm when it comes to that. Or delighting in the wrong thing.
Right.
You know, you talked about what should we be taking pleasure in. Some films are not designed to be pleasurable, and but they're still honest, and that could be a good viewing experience. So those are the things I would add, but I love how you said that.
Can I add one thing to that? That is so important because what we consume, you know, the food we consume, but also the entertainment we consume has a deeply formative effect on us. And I have felt more malformation happen to me by watching a show like Friends that completely normalizes sleeping around and you know what I mean? Than I had watching The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which actually, in my fear, drew me closer to the Lord. because I believe that story happened, at least a version of it. I believe that story is possible. It makes me want to cling to the source of true power, and it makes me want to walk in the power of the Holy Spirit and live a life worthy of the calling that the Lord has put on my life, far more than something like Game of Thrones, which I never watched, but was so popular. Mm-hmm. So I would caution someone who is saying you can never watch those movies because it's opening a door to the demonic. I think the devil is a lot more subtle, than just to use horror movies, and uses all kinds of things that come out of Hollywood that are far more subtle, that make behavior that is not pleasing to the Lord very, very normalized.
Yeah, that's a fascinating juxtaposition, and that's really helpful that we have to use discernment and intentionality with things that we engage with. And I'm actually super glad you guys brought this up, because we have several other episodes of the Table podcast that talk about film in particular. We have a whole series, actually, if you visit our website. But other episodes are like film and life's issues, engaging culture through film, a Christian view of faith in films. And so there are several of them in which we explore like movies that we've seen at the Sundance Film Festival, or in general, what does it mean to look with art such as movies through our Christian perspective? What do we glean from it? And then also, what do we reject? Because I think a lot of times Christians are known a lot more for what they like reject and what they're not about than for like what we love and what we do celebrate. And so I guess that brings me to, we talked about the like supernatural part. Do you guys think that there are ways for horror films to end up being a bridge into spiritual conversations with people who like maybe are not interested in like going to church with you or reading the Bible with you, but are like really into horror films?
I like that you brought up the example of Exorcism of Emily Rose. It's always a tongue twister for me. I attended a discussion with Scott Derrickson, who created Exorcism of Emily Rose, and he would describe the research process he went through, because it's based on an actual exorcist account. Yeah. So it wasn't just something he made up. So he researched it, wrote the script on it, and he does describe about just the amount of prayer he put into it, as well as the authenticity of research, the diligence in that. And he said, one of his main goals was to make people aware of the spiritual reality, where in Western culture, we really ignore it, both non-Christians and Christians, right? Christians go about our days. We don't think about angels and demons, rounded about in our society. You think of the old 90s book, Frank Peretti's, This Present Darkness, that made all of us so aware of the spiritual realm and reality. And, one of the takeaways I got from that discussion from him was, if you can get people who are basically naturalistic or materialistic in their view to have a sensitivity towards the spiritual realm and reality, you've moved the ball down the field a little bit. Now you're starting to become more aware of, okay, there's more to this world than the physical things that are about me or around me. And an awareness to maybe listening to God and how God is working, because now you're aware of that spiritual realm and reality. And at the same time, that the conversation of discernment will become also important, because, for Western culture that is largely not as aware of spirituality. I remember when I was a teenager watching The Exorcist, and my dad came out and told me to turn it off and not watch it. And it's because from an Asian Christian perspective, spirituality is much more of an awareness, and we're much more sensitive to it. And he said this to me, he was not a Christian, but even from a non-Christian perspective of having that, that discernment of, well, what is your background? Where do you, what is it that's more sensitive to you? And so I think the bridges can kind of go in multiple levels in that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, right before I came in here, just looking on Facebook, looking at my news feed, one of the things that popped up, this British online magazine, The Quietus, I saw one of its articles from the last, few days, as of today, was about Mulholland Drive, David Lynch film that came out, 25 years ago now? Yeah. So they're still talking about that. And it's like by nature kind of a confusing narrative. But the headline, I didn't get a chance to read it. I was just like, wow, there's another great example. The headline was, is this narrative about the possibility of redemption? Right? And so you see that a lot if you follow just conversations you might have with people who are, just interested in the arts and the kind of questions that they bring to it. But also, just magazines that aren't from a Christian perspective, but they're still kind of wrestling with these questions. Or I watched Sinners like in the last couple of weeks. I finally got around to seeing that, and I was thinking about the themes in that film. And a major one is belonging. I won't go into detail. I don't want any spoilers. But there's like all these interesting sort of factions in this community, and they all have a different agenda and these competing narratives. And you're kind of tracking with this one main character who's getting pulled in all these different directions. And that's like just this huge question, what does it mean to belong? Identity and gifting is also built into that story very strongly, along with some other things that we talk about all the time socially. So anyone who has watched that film would have all those things would just jump out to them. And then there's plenty of opportunities, to go from there and to say, well, this is how this film framed it. And it raised a question. So I don't know. Yeah. What do you think about identity or a sense of belonging or, your allegiance to a group or something like that? So yeah, a lot of potential there.
I just want to reply to that. And I think that's Sinners is a great example of where there may be a film that is okay for one and not for another. Like for me, I was not okay with that film, both morally and also from a writing standpoint. I wouldn't recommend it. And the reviewers reflect, I think, this difference as well, too. What Aaron shares and how I feel about it. The reviewers are on both sides of the spectrum when it comes on this, too. So that, going back to that, what is okay for you and what is, your discernment of it is important. The problem is sometimes you walk into a film, like Sinners, I think, walking into it, you didn't know where exactly it was going to go. And then you're 50 minutes into it, and you're like, and
hypothetically, if someone hasn't seen it, could you just give like the premise of this movie?
Well, the basic byline is it deals with the topic of racism, and it's couched in blues music, but involves vampires.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I didn't even know that, and I feel like I'm on the cutting edge of the the genre.
It is definitely a rated R horror film.
Okay.
And that, to add to this, just to clarify, for horror films, there are a long list of really good PG-13 horror films. So they're not all the blood, gore, kind of films. There are a good long list, like A Quiet Place. It's a very popular horror film that's PG-13.
I thought it was great.
So to create fear, it doesn't require certain types of graphic content. Does that make sense?
I think the better ones actually don't.
Right.
It's
the really the writing.
Ones, right. I mean, the better ones let a story build. They introduce you to the characters so that by the time things start to get funny, and I use the original Poltergeist as an example, nothing scary happens in that movie until you're 30 minutes in. But by the time things start to get weird, you're so invested in this family and you're so invested in the story that it just grips you all the way to the end.
Yeah, I think the
and
original...
There's nothing gratuitous in it.
I think the original 1980s Poltergeist is actually PG.
It is.
Right? It's
yeah.
PG.
Oh, yeah. It is. It is PG.
So there are a lot of, I think, clarifications, that's important when it comes to looking at the horror genre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I also want to highlight, I love the respectful disagreement. Nobody's like, well, if you're a Christian, you really cannot hold that view. Like that there's these different ideas of like, oh, okay, I land in a different place, and we're like all fine with that. We're all following the conviction of the Spirit. I think it's been very clear throughout the episode that everybody's like, hey, you have to be obedient to what the Lord calls you to. And that's with horror movies, but that's with everything else too, in terms of what you're going to eat and drink and whatever you do. You're doing all of it to the glory of God. So that's
Did you say
point.
glory of God?
That would be a different paraphrase. 1 Corinthians 10:31. That's funny. So what that actually makes me think of, are there, I know that we just talked about how we're not blanket wholesale, Christians should always watch this and should never watch that, for example. But are there, for you guys in particular, different lines that you draw about like, okay, I don't watch films that are super gory. Like you talked about your affinity for the ones that do highlight the supernatural. How do you guys choose for yourselves what horror films you do and don't engage with?
I don't like anything gratuitous in any kind of genre. So that always goes back to what's fitting, right? So that's part of it for me. I don't, body horror is an interesting question, because there are examples of it that I do think are fitting. It's always difficult to watch. Just as an example, a director like David Cronenberg, that's generally what he focuses on. Anything that he does is going to involve body horror, so.
That's like blood and gore.
Well, it's like there's something, there's an exploration of, it's a monster within kind of idea, but specifically, is something going to happen to me? Is something going to happen to my body? And he takes that in a lot of different directions. But the fear of it, the fear that it evokes would be, that's, part of the brokenness of the world is I'm broken. And then there's like a moral side to that and a psychological side to that. But there's also just a physical side to that. Mm-hmm. Just the horror of getting old and getting sick and, weird things happening. And so I will watch those. I think they're interesting. I like the points that he makes. They're very graphic, so they would be an example of that. But on the other hand, I don't morally object to it, but I don't like zombie movies, and there's just something about it that creeps me out.
What are some of
It's very subjective. Why is that, Aaron? I don't know.
Yeah.
So you didn't love The Walking Dead?
My therapist and I will have a conversation. I'll get back
there
to
you
you.
go.
I really don't know what it is, but it's something. But the thing about it, I like the fact that that they're there, that those stories exist, and I've seen some. And I have noted my reaction to it. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Why does that bother me so much? What's really going on there? And so I'll actually reflect on that and see, like, what meaning can I make out of it? So, yeah.
That's fascinating. And that brings me to, I ended up reading a book recently that had zombies in it that I did not anticipate. But it evoked in me this idea that, okay, this is just like resurrection gone wrong. Like, we all have this longing for resurrection and things made right, and, death being the enemy, because death is never our friend. And but there's, this uncanniness to where if that's half achieved or not done in the Lord's way, that we have this kind of revulsion to it or something like that. So that's fascinating that you bring that up.
It's something about I don't like seeing a human treated that way. That's another thing I wouldn't like.
Right.
Like Saw,
right,
or things like that, or even other films that I don't know if they're horror or not, but they're like a kind of a revenge fantasy. Mm-hmm. So there's certain things about, I don't know, I feel it. I feel like this, what I think about the man being made in the image of God and what that implies, and then seeing this grotesque display of humanity is really, and I'm not, it's more than just offensive. It's just deeply unsettling. Mm-hmm. And, but that also, doesn't that just reflect kind of in some way who we actually are? Because we walk around living our lives, not exactly to the glory of God. Mm. And so we're kind of half alive sometimes. Mm. So it might be showing me something in myself I don't like. That's possible too. Mm.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about in other episodes, how films are revealing of our culture, like we talked about at the opening of this conversation, but also of sometimes we see something in ourselves that we're like, oh, mm-hmm. I didn't want to be convicted about that, or didn't realize that tendency in myself. So that's really helpful. It's
completely antithetical to flourishing in a way that I can't ignore, mm-hmm. So that's definitely part of what a zombie film would be, for example.
Yeah. And the conviction from the Spirit is a gift, and so we're able to see things in ourselves that we're like, wow, I need to turn this over to the Lord and walk more closely with Him. So, Brian, how about you? How do you choose what films you do and don't engage with?
Well, first of all, another great contrast, because I am in the zombie films. Although I went, just to prep for this episode, I went back and looked at all the zombie films that have been made, and I've actually watched only a small percentage of them. I've noticed.
Most of them are really bad.
Most of them are bad. Huh?
They're terrible.
And I think that's an example. That point you're making, Rebecca, is an example of where I draw the line, where films cross the line. Like in horror, I think it can cross the line to sadism, where there seems to be almost a glamorization of just something very sadistic. How many ways can you kill somebody, mm-hmm. and there's no moral premise throughout the film. And I think a good example of this is a currently very popular zombie franchise that started about 16 years ago. It's the British made film 28 Days Later. It started with that, and then they had the second. I love the first one, and there are spiritual overtones and biblical elements that are interwoven in. I mean, and a lot of times in horror films, that is the cathartic. It's in the midst of all this darkness. There's like a glimmer hanging on for something that represents the glory of God. A trust and a faith in God. And that's what you see in A Quiet Place as well too, when you see the family praying together at the meal. And not to give anything away again, but these are sewn in there. Walking Dead has that as well too. My old boss from Biola, he was one of the executive producers of Walking Dead. So you have Christian thought that are sewn into these films, and so in the midst of this darkness, you have these glimmers of hope and light. But to go back to 28 Days Later as an example, so first installment was great. The second one, I'm thinking, like, what is this? It just felt like sadism. And then I went and I looked up, it felt like two different creators, and sure enough, it was a different creator. And that makes a big difference, because every filmmaker is showing you their view of the world. So the first creator show you their view of the world with redemption and hope. The second one was it felt like sadism. Then the third one goes back to the first creator, and they disregard the second installment. They disregard the second sequel, and continues the storyline as if the second one didn't even happen. And I'm like, third one, great. And I'm looking forward to the fourth one. And so, every film I think can cross the line. Like romantic comedy for me can cross the line into raunchiness. And I don't like that. Horror can cross the line into sadism. I remember watching this one film, 7 minutes into it, I had to stop and turn it off. I'm like, that's too much. And sometimes I think developing an awareness of seeing where this is going. You can tell maybe within the first 10 minutes where this is going, what it's going to be like. It's the same with like certain action or romance films. Is this going to be overly sexualized? Lots of vulgarity. Is it over the top of this? And then you have to make that choice and decision of, okay, I'm not going to keep going down this road, because it's going to take you down a road, and some films, like I mentioned earlier, it just catches you off guard, like the book you read, you don't know. And it's like, oh man. And that the hardest part is when you're halfway into it. Do you stop? That's the hardest part. But a lot of them you can tell within the first act, in act one,
sure,
where it's going.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a strict method of how I choose my movies. I will say that I love good storytelling and I love good writing. And as a writer, I pay a lot of attention to that. And so when do I not watch a horror movie? When it's bad. That's one. However, I want to be culturally aware, and this is something that I do think deeply about. So if there is, like when the Paranormal Activity, the found footage, when that came out and everyone was just raving about it, I wanted to watch it so that I could be culturally aware and see what my peers were being drawn to. Now, I do not like found footage. I feel like it's a lazy filmmaking. I just don't love it. So I got about 1.5 movies into that franchise, and I thought, okay, this is silly. I'm not going to do it. I tend to, like I said earlier, gravitate toward things that are based on true stories, have a supernatural element to them, and resolve themselves with a redemptive thread.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that is the true story. We cannot save ourselves. We need someone outside of us to step in and save us and to do what we cannot. And we need to know that there's hope for a better future. And that's the story of the Bible. So I think I tend to be drawn to that one story over and over and over again in all of its forms: thriller, action adventure, the Marvel series, and the horror genre.
Yeah.
Can I add one more to that then? When it comes to fear, I think really well-written horror films, as Rebecca's referring to, really hones in on what are we really afraid of. So like Rebecca used the example of found footage. Well, Cloverfield is like that.
That was pretty good. Yeah,
that was pretty good, right?
Good.
Yeah. And because it was good writing, and the good writing part of it was this very psychological part of what we really fear at the center, what drives the whole story is regret. Is remorse, right? That's the entire plot of why the guy is trying to go in the opposite direction to go. I mean, that's the whole story of saving his girlfriend. There's this deep regret that drives the entire story. You see the monster very little, actually, right?
Right.
And you see the people, it's the humans, and it's what the humans are fearing. But you see the monster very little actually throughout the whole film. And so that's a 2010 film, it's fairly older. Hopefully I didn't say too much, but I think that's a good example of, a lot of, most of these horror films, Walking Dead, it's the fear is something very, very human. You know what I mean? It's not something really external to us. It's something like regret. It's a fear of loss. It's a fear of death, fear of what's in the afterlife. Is there nothing in the afterlife, or is there, something very torturous and scary in the afterlife? And have I lived up to my greatest potential to, or will I die? with all kinds of regret. Did I find love, or will I die not finding love? It's these fears that we all have that's been now put into a setting that is very scary, and it's made very visual and visceral to us to experience.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because that's sort of highlighting these universal human longings, but just like the opposite. And, like you're talking about, the fear is that I won't have my longing desire satisfied of being loved or understood or accepted or something like that.
Right. Or as Aaron referred to earlier, the fear of not finding belonging, or community.
Yeah, with Cloverfield too, there's the regret piece, and then I like the context of it. I think, I assume that that's a post 9/11 kind of regrouping in a way. It's like this fear of how safe am I in my community? How safe am I in my country? Is there something, because I live in the middle of the city, there's all these kinds of natural, I might be afraid of crime or something like that, but is there something, big that's going to come in and attack that's going to overwhelm us, and that we as a nation aren't going to be able to fight against, right? And so I think there's a touch of that in Cloverfield as well. So that's another one a fear that we live with, I think.
Yeah. So we've highlighted so much in this discussion. I want to give each of you a chance we can just start here and go around to give some any closing thoughts that you would encourage a Christian with regarding horror films.
Oh, wow. Well, I think that really good horror films are meant to generate one real positive response, which is repentance. It scares you to do the opposite or to correct yourself. And I think that what genuinely scares us is something that Umberto Eco calls the moral monster in his book, History of Beauty. In this theological aesthetics, it's called the moral monster. And the thing that we're scared of, something very human in us, and something that is characterized with character vices. There's malice, there's maliciousness, there's hatred, there's anger. That's the moral monster. They're deceitful, they're lies. It's the serpent in the garden. And so being aware that, hey, these are all the things that are opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. Those are the things that comprise a moral monster that we're truly scared of. And then the fear within us is the things that, it's part of my brokenness, the brokenness of fear of regret and loss and not belonging. And that repentance is a caution against what makes the moral monster, and a caution against the things that I fear within myself, that how do I then live and embrace Christ-likeness? That one, I don't become the moral monster. Two, it resolves my own fears of these other things in my own brokenness that I fear succumbing to.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's really good. I think I would speak to the one who is adamantly opposed to the horror genre and thinks that nobody should ever watch it ever. And I would say that is probably the case for you. That is probably a guardrail the Lord has put up for you, and that is not something you should engage with. But before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, I would say that I think one value that the horror genre adds to the cultural conversation is that we live in an age of materialism. We live in an age, and I think, Brian, you said it earlier, even Christians, we say we believe that the spiritual world is real, and we act very much like it's not. So I think that the horror genre reminds us that there's more to see than what we see. And I think it reminds us that we have an enemy, and that our enemy does not play fair, and that his whole MO is lies and deceit and just playing dirty. And I would also say, probably quite surprisingly, I have had some of my deepest, most powerful moments of intimacy with the Lord after I watched something like a Walking Dead episode that caused half the audience to leave it. It brought out a rage in me and a need for vengeance in me that I didn't know was in there. And I had to put that before the Lord. And it wasn't a real life situation that brought that out of me. It was a manufactured one. And I'm so grateful for that the Lord could use something like that to show me there is something in me that needs to be laying at the foot of the cross. And so I think that they have a very redemptive I think there is redemption in them. And then I would also just caution you to look around at everything else you're consuming. You know, if you are saying never, ever, ever watch a horror movie, but you're reading 50 Shades of Grey, you know, we're standing in some hypocrisy there. If you have no problem watching Landman or Yellowstone, and I that's, you know, between you and the Lord, but you're condemning all the horror movies. Just remember, it's not just the horror genre that malforms us. We really need to pay attention to everything that we're watching and listening to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think watching with intentionality,
yeah,
kind of piggybacking
absolutely.
on what you said, that's what I was thinking to share and to reiterate. So both for yourself in terms of how you make meaning and how you live, but then also seeking opportunities to talk about that with other people, and then seeing also too, you know, it's important to understand the intention of the filmmaker and things like that. That should always be, you know, we should always know that and have an honest, you know, read of what we're engaging with. But there's also this element of what good might God make of something that's beyond what was originally intended, right? So that's a reality of redemption too. Mm-hmm. And so I think that can also, I mean, some of the worshipful experiences that I have engaged in all kind of secular media, horror films included, there, you know, God is at work, and it's part of my theological reflection, sort of my discipline of how I engage. I try to continue to listen to see what God would say. That's for my formation, but also for what I might have to share with others too.
Mm-hmm. That is so helpful. You guys have done such a good job of nuancing this topic. There's been no just blanket statements of, you know, always this or never this. It's been really clear to me throughout this conversation that we're encouraging people to be attentive to the Spirit and follow where their conviction takes them in desiring to be obedient to the Lord. We've talked about, this has been so insightful, to show me how truth, goodness, and beauty can actually be communicated through horror films. Truth in terms of the fact that there is a supernatural world and things like that. Goodness, and when it sets up right and wrong, good and evil, and then beauty as well, and thinking about the world that God has made and the emotions that people are either expressing or entering into or desiring to engage with. And so thank you guys so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
this is fun.
I also want to thank you for listening as well. If you like our show, go ahead and leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. It's a great way to support the show and help other people to discover us. And we hope that you join us next time when we discuss issues of God and culture to show the relevance of theology to everyday life.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.